Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
Recent violence at Bay Area schools sparked safety concerns. California's role at the climate summit in Copenhagen, with Governor Schwarzenegger taking the lead. San Francisco is one city among many throughout the state looking to cut costs while preserving valuable services. And surprisingly high levels of lead found in some children's toys. Coming up next. Good evening, I'm Belva Davis. Welcome to This Week in Northern California. Here are some stories from this week's news. San Francisco-based Wells Fargo said that it would repay $25 billion of federal TARP money by selling $10.4 billion in new stock. The repayment will free the bank from the pay restrictions and oversight that are part of the bailout program. Intel is being sued by the Federal Trade Commission. The Silicon Valley chipmaker is accused of engaging in anti-competitive behavior by abusing its dominant position, preventing competitors from offering lower-priced products to consumers. Backers of a measure to legalize recreational use of marijuana in California say they have collected enough signatures for a ballot initiative in 2010. If passed, it would allow adults 21 and over to possess an ounce of marijuana and cultivate 25 square feet for personal consumption. The fight to move the Oakland A's to San Jose heated up. A coalition opposed to the move, Stand for San Jose, says public funds or subsidies shouldn't be used to bring the team to a new downtown ballpark. San Jose officials say the stadium would not divert city resources from schools, police, and fire services. Joining me for our news panel tonight, Rachel Gordon, staff writer for the San Francisco Chronicle. Craig Miller, senior editor for KQED's Climate Watch Initiative. And Jill Tucker, staff writer, also with the San Francisco Chronicle. Jill, let's begin with you in a story that you wrote this week about safety in schools. Have we seen an increase in violent incidents of late?
Well, it sure does feel that way, doesn't it? We had the alleged rape of the 12-year-old girl at Portola Middle School in El Cerrito just a week ago. And 2 months ago, we had the alleged gang rape at Richmond High School. And when you have incidents like this, it really does shine the spotlight on the safety in schools and makes people think about what's happening in the schools. And it does, there are violent incidents going on in every school. All the time. They're in every district. And as I said in my story, sexual assaults are not uncommon in schools. I don't think it's getting worse, but I think when we have a spotlight shining on it, it brings the attention again. Issues like Columbine, incidents like Columbine and the rape of a 12-year-old girl make people stop and go, wait a minute, what do we need to do? And we start focusing on all the things that we might want to do in the schools to make them safer. Schools are supposed to be safe, and when we feel like they're not, it is definitely a wake-up call, and I think that's what the Bay Area is getting this week and over the last 2 months with these two incidents. These are shocking and sad and horrible incidents to think about happening on school grounds.
So what are the school officials doing? Are they doing community outreach with bringing in outsiders to say, we've got to crack down, like putting up metal detectors and putting up spotlights and security cameras? Are they going into the schools and talking to the students more quietly about the consequences of sexual assault, how to protect yourself from it? How's that being handled?
Yes, and yes. As I said, after incidents like this, after Columbine, after these types of incidents, you see a lot of reactions from communities and school officials to really address this thing. So you're starting to see things like everything from, gee, should we have cameras? We need higher fences. We need more people. West Contra Costa is also looking at character education, which is, sounds sort of, kind of progressive and that type of thing. But really what they're trying to do is help children understand what decisions they need to make, how they need to act. A lot of things that you think they might be getting at home, but a lot of children don't. And they need to bring that into the school so that the children are making good decisions, as well as increasing cameras. A lot of times those cameras and metal detectors don't work. Ultimately, kids are going to be in fights, bring guns to school, sexual assaults are going to happen. A camera isn't going to stop that.
That sort of anticipates a question I had about how much you can really attack this problem with extra layers of security and cameras and metal detectors and fences and things like that, or whether ultimately the solution has to be kind of more systemic.
Yeah, I think it has to be more systemic, and I think there are concerns across schools right now. Budget cuts are really hurting schools in many, many ways. And you might not think when you talk about increasing class size, which West Contra Costa, they just signed a teacher's contract last week or this week that increased class sizes up to 30 kids. And what that means, okay, you don't think of that in terms of safety, but what that ultimately means is that there will be fewer adults on campus, and up to 50% fewer adults. And if you're talking about supervision, you're talking about already that we don't have a lot of counselors on these schools. So it is systemic, not only in terms of what we need to do in terms of educating the community, working with the kids, but also in terms of just the basics of having adults around the kids and enough adults.
We really should explain what happened last week or this week.
At Portola Middle School during the school day, it was reported that a 12-year-old girl was in a stairwell at the school and was attacked, raped by a 14-year-old boy. The alleged attack, again, we don't know a lot about it because they're juveniles. The district attorney in West Contra Costa won't even confirm the charges. We have heard that a charge of rape was brought on the boy. He was supposed to be arraigned this week, but again, it's a juvenile system, so we don't have a lot of insight into what really happened. What we do know from what people are telling us at the school and the officials is that these two were in a stairwell during class time at the end of the day last Thursday, that there were some children or witnesses that stumbled on them in the hall and told an adult. That was the good news coming out of it, that children went and found an adult to help them with this. That wasn't the case in the alleged gang rape at Richmond High School 2 months earlier.
Jill, there must be hard choices for school administrators and policymakers to be making in terms of how do you deal, I mean, with the rape, how you deal with that, but even with bullying cases or headbutting on the playground or kicking, there seems to be a big debate over whether do you suspend the kids, do you expel them, you don't want them to be out of school necessarily, but you also don't want to tolerate this behavior. Is there any philosophy now that's kind of a common thread running through the school districts, or is it really just a case-by-case basis, you think?
Well, in San Francisco, they just passed a policy where they are trying to completely reduce, if not eliminate, suspensions of children. They want these kids to be in school, and they want to work with the kids so that they are, again, making the right choices. The reality is, though, San Francisco did a survey, and 900 middle school and high school kids said they brought guns to school. So we have a huge issue that we have to tackle here. And we're not just talking about bullying and teasing, which are terrible. We're talking about everyday guns in schools and sexual assaults happening.
And no further study as to what motivate these young people to commit such acts one against the other. I mean,
yeah, I think there's a number of reasons, and you have the community, the things that are happening in the community rolling into the schools.
Okay, not a pleasant story at any time of the year.
No, it's very sad.
But do we know if there's going to be some follow-up action?
The district is doing an investigation about what happened in terms of their own policy, so we'll get some information about that. But it's doubtful that we'll get a lot of information coming out of the court system on this.
Okay. Well, policy is what Craig Miller has been concentrating upon, hoping that there would be some policy announcements to make. Well, California was very strong with our governor being there and a leader. What did he contribute to the Copenhagen summit?
You know, it's interesting because California doesn't have official standing at the UN Climate Summit. You have to be a country to get that. But it is kind of remarkable, though, that it's kind of almost like an ex officio country. A lot of what you hear coming out of Sacramento about the leadership role that California has taken in climate policy is a little bit more than hype, actually, and the state has a pretty good rep around the world for having taken that leadership position. And so when Arnold Schwarzenegger goes towards Copenhagen and takes the stage, people listen. And one of the things they were listening to in his speech this week, which was, I think, particularly interesting, was that the core message of his speech was not to rely on national and international agreements to solve this problem. He's said for a long time that 80% is his number of the actual adaptation and mitigation things you have to do sort of on the ground to prepare for or try to stave off climate change have to happen anyway at the local and regional level. And so he took the stage and basically, exhorted his other sub-national leaders, the regions and cities and counties, to keep doing what they're doing, and actually not, when he said as much, don't wait around for these guys to do something because they might not do it.
Now, California has, definitely California has taken the lead in terms of policies about reducing greenhouse emissions and environmental policies in general. But certainly California also has a very vested interest in the environmental movement, does it not? And that has to be part of the reason why California is at that global stage. It
was also a terrific opportunity to do a commercial in front of a global audience for California's technology. It just so happens that the lion's share of the patents, of the venture capital for renewable technology, so-called green, clean technology, just happens to find its way to California. And so there's a huge business opportunity here as well if this takes off.
Craig, there's a lot of talk, it seems, at least with the protester community in Copenhagen, of not just looking at new technologies, which may or may not work or they may take a while, but really kind of using the power of the pocketbook to start really taxing people for carbon emissions. Is that anything at all that Schwarzenegger is looking at remotely, that you've got to, if you want to stop behavior, you've got to start charging people so they're going to stop that way?
Well, a certain amount of this will start happening, I think, no matter which route we take. But on the state level, with AB 32, the Global Solutions Warming Act from 2006, on the regional level with the Western Climate Initiative, where several states and Canadian provinces have banded together to start a regional carbon trading market. On the national level and probably the international level, where we all seem to be headed is cap and trade. This idea that you can buy and sell permits, to emit carbon dioxide, but that over time the total cap goes down. And the voices starting to question that you're starting to hear the volume being turned up a little bit, not just on the business side, but on the environmentalist side too, because people are really starting to question whether this is going to get us there. And are starting to say, no, this is a system that can be too easily gamed, and what we really need is some form of a carbon tax that's more direct. Let's just come out and say it. We're taxing you. That's how we're putting a price on carbon.
They're even looking at that from the consumer level, right? With like congestion-based pricing, charge automobiles if they're going to drive during rush hour into downtown areas, or raise the parking meter rates or whatever to try to discourage people at least to get out of their cars. Not as big a problem perhaps as industry, but still kind of tackle people that way. Is that?
And in some ways, that's not so much putting a price on carbon as it is trying to. It's a social engineering.
But it'll be interesting because Schwarzenegger is so against any type of tax increase. It'll be interesting to see if this is an area where he's willing to finally say, well, okay, if this is going to change behavior, you can pay more. But his policies have been so much against not taxing.
The popular thing to do politically is to say, let's find a market solution to this. And I do think, you're seeing now more people stepping up and saying the market may not be equipped to handle this.
Do you think those with voices objecting and saying that there isn't really a problem, are they growing? You indicated they were beginning to be listened to, but seriously growing strong enough to slow this down? It
didn't seem to be that much of a factor in Copenhagen. I will say that in this country, the polling shows that that group is having an effect. It may be the minority that does not accept the prevailing climate science right now, but it is a very vocal minority. And there have been incidents recently, involving exposed emails from universities and so forth, which haven't helped that. However, in California, the polling, according to the polling, doesn't normally reflect the same trend as the rest of the country. America seems to have the biggest group of deniers and skeptics when it comes to climate science, but California usually bucks that trend.
How much has the recession had to do with this change of attitude?
In attitudes, I think it has had an effect. Obviously, it shows up in the polling every time there's an economic recession. All environmental concerns go right to the bottom, and we're in the, like 20th on the list of 20. When people rate, what things are concerning them the most. But I think there are a lot of other factors that play into it too. There's a whole matrix of things, including religious beliefs, economic self-interest, and many other factors that overlap.
But I thought it was interesting. We were talking earlier that when you said Google, and you have these people who are obviously involved economically and have a huge interest economically in the recession or what's going on, but yet the CEO of Google said that there were two things that he was concerned about.
I ran to Eric Schmidt, who's the CEO of Google, recently, and I said, do you think there is any bigger problem right now, a higher priority than climate change? Because they've been very proactive in this area. And he said, well, let me put it to you this way. He said there are two things that have the potential to kill millions of people on the planet: nuclear proliferation and climate change. So those are your items.
Thank you so much.
And on another bright note.
Well, we move to what are not bright notes that we're hearing from cities. I mentioned the recession, and that is the fiscal problems of cities all around the Bay Area. But our city here, San Francisco, seems to be unique in its approach as to what to do. Rachel Gordon, what are some of the things we're hearing?
Right, it's unique in its approach in terms of looking for a new way to raise revenue, a new way to cut the spending. Let's just put it a little bit in perspective. San Francisco, for the next fiscal year, is looking at a $522 million deficit. That's about half of the general fund that they have, discretionary general fund money. That comes on top of a $575 million deficit that had to be closed for this year. And just on Thursday, Mayor Gavin Newsom came out with his proposed list of mid-year cuts, because the budget is much worse than they had anticipated when it was first adopted, of another $45 million. Let's move over a little bit. Oakland's looking at a $25 million deficit next year, $19 million mid-year cuts. They're even talking about selling the convention centers in Oakland to try to raise some capital there. They've already cut salaries, cut jobs. San Francisco's doing the same thing. San Jose, $96 million deficit next year. So it's not just one city, but it's across the board. San Francisco's looking at a couple of things. There's a big fight over what pot of money is going to which department. So this week, Supervisor Chris Daly, probably the most liberal, outspoken member on the Board of Supervisors, said, I know how we can save some money. Let's just really whack the police and fire departments. He wants to cut $27 million from those departments. That would no doubt cut deep into staffing. So you might have to potentially have less firefighters on duty at any one time, police patrols, maybe fewer of that. I think he just threw that out there to make a point, because he wants some money, more money to go to the health department and social services. I don't think that plan's going to get anywhere, but it certainly has the uniformed folks and employees in San Francisco a little bit nervous for that. They're looking at another tax in San Francisco, or a user fee, an alcohol impact fee in the city that's being floated around. And so every time you buy a bottle of wine or a beer or a bottle of tequila, you might have to pay an extra tax on that. And they're saying you can do the impact study on that alcoholism causes problems in healthcare, in public safety, and areas along that line. So we're going to see a lot of ideas being thrown out there. Interestingly, I think Gavin Newsom this week, when he talked about that $45 million of cuts, he said it's difficult, but it's not impossible. It's a lot of belt tightening, delaying some capital programs. He's going to be looking at probably trying to merge some city departments to try to find efficiencies there, but there's no easy answer whatsoever.
How much of this is, San Francisco is known for being amusingly political, and so when you have, these folks throwing out these ideas about cutting police and fire, which of course, no one is going to want, I think they'd rather see have no one answer the phone at Public Works than not have a police officer respond to their house when they need them.
Unless you have a pothole in front of your street.
Unless you have a pothole, sure. But I do wonder, how much of this is game playing? Because there's still a lot of crazy stuff that's going on there. And,
right. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of game playing. And it's funny, I've covering City Hall for 20 years. The first time I think I heard about the big budget deficits, like, oh my God, the sky is falling thing. And then you see things aren't necessarily as bad. But I think what we're going to see happening this year with the budget, because it's one year on top of another bad year and really not great hope that things are going to get better next time, is you're going to start seeing kind of a quiet erosion of city services, not just in San Francisco, but across the board. So you may not hire as many mechanics to fix the muni buses. More buses are broken down. That means fewer buses are getting on the street. More runs are going to be missed. Deferring street maintenance, the same kind of thing. You have less crews to fix the potholes. It's going to get worse. And you get park and rec if you don't have gardeners to take care of the gardeners. We saw that in the mid-90s. We'll probably see that again.
How about more cities actually filing for bankruptcy? Because I thought when Vallejo became the first major city in California to do this, that there would just be dominoes falling, but we haven't seen that.
Right. I mean, let's take San Francisco for an example of why we're not going to get to that point, or at least probably not in our lifetime. San Francisco City and County has a $6.6 billion budget. There's a lot of programs, services that can be cut before you even get down to the very basic. In this city, we've really tried to make Cadillac of services, great social services, healthcare. So we've got a far way to go.
All right. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Rachel, Craig, Jill, good to have you here. In 2007, millions of children's items from mainstream toy companies were recalled due to dangerous levels of lead, prompting the 2008 passage of the Consumer Protection Safety Improvement Act. Even with these new regulations, a recent investigation by KQED's Quest series found dangerously high levels. Joining me now is Juan Ha, reporter with KQED Public Radio California Report. Juan, let's start with the findings of your investigation for Quest. What did you find?
Well, Belva, we essentially wanted to test the effectiveness of the new consumer product safety law that went into effect in February. And we essentially went on a shopping spree throughout here in the Bay Area as well as other parts of California. We bought up about 200 children's products, including toys, and we had the assistance of the Center for Environmental Health. They tested the items for us, and we found that 1 in 5 of the items came up positive for lead, and with really high lead levels in some cases. Here's just a sampling of the items. Let's take a closer look. Here I've got a plastic, children's car, and this car originally had been coated with a yellow paint. We took it to a laboratory, and the laboratory basically scratched off the paint and tested it, and this paint essentially was 10 times the lead limit. Not something that you'd want your kid to be playing with. And what's interesting about that is, the lead limits that govern paint, they've been in place for the last 20 years. And so it really begs the question of whether manufacturers, toy makers are really serious about...
You're looking at a packet of little cars here, all brightly painted. I mean, what kind of warning? Why would you even suspect that there was a higher level of lead here?
Well, that's the thing. As a parent, as a grandparent, somebody who buys toys for kids, you can't really tell just by looking or even feeling the items at all. You really would need a test kit, and in some of the test kits that are available in the market aren't really that reliable. I mean, so you really do need to bring it to, an agency or a laboratory to get it tested. So, I mean, that's the scary part as a parent. You don't really know for sure.
Yeah. And many of them, I mean, this is a low price item, so to test it would probably cost you more than the toys. So it really does put parents in a pretty tight spot.
Right, and also, I mean, a lot of these items we bought at discount stores, dollar stores. They would make perfect stocking stuffers. And a lot of these manufacturers, even though they may be aware that there's a law in place, they really simply can't afford to test these items when they're selling it for $1.99. I wanted to show you this because this is an item that my 6-year-old daughter Quinn would love to have as a stocking stuffer. It's a metal hair clip, and the problem with metal jewelry like this is that it's often coated with lead, or it's made of lead. And in fact, this piece contains 32% lead. Not something that you'd want, your daughter to mouth or even touch, right, as she's putting it in her hair.
Let's move to what all girls seem to know about.
Hannah Montana.
Yes.
It's big around our house. This is a diary set, and what's interesting about this is it carries the logo of a company that a lot of families know and trust, Disney. We actually found several Disney items that had high levels of lead. Disney says, of course, that they ask that their licensees test the products and make sure that the products meet all standards. But the problem is, they might test the first batch or the second or third batch, but then after that they might switch manufacturers. New paint might be used, a new kind of material might be used, and so then safety kind of goes out the window.
This is really complicated. And what do we have over here with is it the interior of the ball or the exterior?
Another category of toys and items that are problematic are vinyl products. Soft kind of plush, soft plastic is often problematic because the lead is often used to stabilize the materials and kind of bind it together. And so this, I could see my newborn son mouthing it, and it's not something that you would want a child mouthing at all, because just minuscule amounts of lead could enter the child's bloodstream, and you could cause irreparable brain damage potentially. And stuff that normally you wouldn't even see in the child, but you would really need a blood test to really confirm that there's a problem there.
So this looks pretty harmless, but not so.
Not so, especially since it's a lunchbox. So it does not make for a very appetizing lunch at all. The surface here is coated with lead, and we actually contacted Ross, which carries this lunchbox, and they've pulled it off the shelf. But you can imagine, I mean, thousands of children, I'm sure, have this lunchbox and maybe even using it today.
So that's the ultimate. You can do these stories and they can pull these items off, but you have no idea what the vast universe out there.
Right. I mean, there are only so many agencies that do test for lead on a regular basis, like the Center for Environmental Health. There's also the government organization, the Consumer Product Safety Commission. They also will issue recalls and occasionally will test items as well. But it's really up to the consumers to be aware of what they're buying and to really avoid kind of these three categories of toys.
Plastics.
Yeah, that we've mentioned.
Well, we want to thank you. At least we know these things. We can maybe keep them out of some homes and out of the mouths of little children. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, you can see more of that research on our website, kqed.org/thisweek, and find the question of the week. This week, what are your beliefs about climate change and how is that reflected in your lifestyle? The San Francisco Ballet was the first ballet company in America to present Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker. It's been a holiday tradition ever since, and you can enjoy KQED's co-production with the San Francisco Ballet, hosted by Bay Area native Christy Yamaguchi, on Sunday, December 20th at noon, and again on Monday, December 21st at 9 p.m. here on Channel 9. Just check our website for other air dates. We close with a glimpse of this dazzling interpretation. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.
Funding for Climate Watch on This Week in Northern California is provided by the Mary Van Voorhees Fund and the Fallis Family Fund.